Hello and welcome to session 6 of our current book club, which is Your Body in Balance by Dr. Neal Barnard. I'm Gustavo Tolosa, your host, and thank you very much for attending. Unfortunately, we won't be able to cover every single chapter, but I came really close to it. So today we will talk about diabetes, which is chapter 8, and maybe a little bit of chapter 9. And then tomorrow we're going to talk about healthy skin and hair, which is chapter 10, and we'll finish the chapter 9. So it really, we came close, very close. And I hope that hopefully you have the book so that you will be able to read it and reread it, because there is so much wonderful information here. So let's get started. And before we start, I will remind you that next not next Monday, but Monday, the 6th of November, I will be starting the last 7-day program of this year. And you can always check my website, plantemis.com, and go to the webinars section, and you will always see the next one announced. Okay, this is a program that has grown and has gotten a lot of attention because it is concise, 7 days. It's doable, it's simple, and the support that we get is really outstanding. All right, so I hope you take a look and maybe join us. And let's get started today with the topic, which is diabetes. And I was debating whether to do this chapter or not. And the reason is because I have already done in another book club, Dr. Neal Barnard's book, Reversing Diabetes. So there is a whole book club on diabetes. It is on my YouTube channel, so you can look for it there. But given the fact that this is a very passionate, a favorite topic of mine, because in my father's side of the family, there was and is diabetes, and I lost my father due to this. I would like to share with people the fact that diabetes type 2, at least, is reversible, like Dr. Neal Barnard describes in this book. So if many times I tell myself, if I knew then in 1995, 96, what I know now, what a difference would have made for my father, for my grandfather, for some aunts and uncles. And but anyways, it is. So chapter 8 says conquering diabetes. I like that term because you really can conquer. Diabetes is disease, a condition that arises purely, according to the experts here, because of the food choices that people make. And it doesn't have really anything to do with sugar. If you have a doctor who will tell you the truth and who knows, and he or she will tell you that the problem is fat, mostly. I remember taking my father to a diabetes specialist. This was many years ago. I knew nothing about all of this. And one thing did stick to me in my head, and that's when the doctor mentioned that the problem was fat and that my father needed to cut fat from the diet. The problem also was that the doctor didn't tell him how, didn't tell me how. He said, just go and cut fat. It would have been nice to have a doctor that told you how to start a whole food plant-based diet. Unfortunately, most doctors don't know that. Okay, so on page 122, 122, let's just read this, understanding diabetes. I mean, what it really is, because most people have the completely wrong answer to this. Of course, it's described here beautifully, but let's just read it here. This is too important to not read. In diabetes, there is too much glucose. Okay, we can say sugar in the blood. Okay, so it is true. There is too much sugar, glucose in the blood. Glucose is your body's natural fuel. You have to understand that the first fuel that the body takes for your daily needs is not protein and it's not fat, is glucose. Just as gasoline powers your car, glucose powers your muscles, brain, and all the rest of you. There is nothing bad about the glucose. Actually, without glucose, you and I would just pretty much die, okay? The problem in diabetes is that glucose is building up in the bloodstream rather than going into the cells of your muscles or liver where it belongs. So that's the real problem. It's not that your body isn't making or is making too much. It's that it's going in the wrong place. It's going to your bloodstream instead of going to the muscles, to your muscle cells and your liver. Normally, glucose is escorted into your cells by insulin, a hormone made in the pancreas. So you have a hormone that is made in your pancreas. Your pancreas works just fine in type 2 diabetes, is making insulin, and insulin is what carries glucose into every one of those muscle cells and brain and liver, etc. The problem in diabetes is that glucose is building up in the bloodstream. Normally, glucose is escorted into your cells by insulin. We said that already. Like a key in a lock, okay, like a key in a lock, insulin attaches to the surface of a muscle cell and signals the cell membrane to let glucose in. It does the same thing for your liver cells. If you have diabetes, however, your insulin is not working right. So let's talk about briefly the types of diabetes. Okay, type 1. Type 1 diabetes occurs when the insulin producing beta cells of the pancreas have been destroyed, okay? Destroyed. This damage is usually irreversible, okay? But this damage is caused by antibodies in the bloodstream. Because the pancreas no longer produces insulin, then of course, what is the treatment? Well, give you insulin multiple times a day with injections or with an external pump device. That's type 1. But the most common is type 2 diabetes. And in type 2 diabetes, your pancreas does make insulin, okay? It's not like in type 1 where it doesn't. In type 2, your pancreas does produce insulin, but the cells of the body resist insulin's action. It is as if the key has trouble turning the lock, so glucose cannot enter the cell as easily. This is called insulin resistance. You probably heard that term. Oh, I'm insulin resistant. Well, what's happening is that the body is making insulin. You also have glucose in your body. Insulin needs to take the glucose to cells, but when insulin arrives to the cell's membrane, it cannot attach it to open and let the glucose in. So what happens? Well, of course, what happens is that the glucose accumulates because it cannot go where it needs to go. It needs to go to the cells. So to compensate for this, the pancreas makes extra insulin. but eventually it can no longer keep up and your blood sugar rises. And then the other type of diabetes is gestational diabetes that occurs in pregnancy and is similar to type 2, but it usually goes away when the pregnancy is over. And it is a sign that a type 2 diabetes could be waiting around the corner unless a woman changes her diet and lifestyle. So what are the numbers? Well, the numbers in a blood test should be, if you're doing fasting blood glucose, the number should be below 100, okay? Now, there is another test, hemoglobin A1C, or just A1C. You want your value there to be 5.6% or less. If it's more than that, you're either pre-diabetic or diabetic. And finally, you have one that is more exact, and it's called glucose tolerance testing, and that's on page 123. Glucose tolerance testing, to get a more detailed view of your blood sugar control, you will swallow a sugary syrup, and your blood will be checked over the next 2 hours. So you have to be in the office where they do your test for at least 2 hours. You drink this sugary syrup, and in the next 2 hours, they check your blood. Okay, the idea is to see if your blood sugar spikes very high, and also to see if your body responds by making insulin, the hormone that escorts glucose from your bloodstream into your cells. And of course, your doctor will interpret these numbers, the results. So on page 124 and 125, there is a discussion of food and type 2 diabetes. Okay, so a plant-based diet is highly effective in reversing diabetes type 2, and of course, in weight loss. And you might be thinking, since a vegan diet probably includes a lot of carbohydrate-rich foods, spaghetti, rice, sweet potatoes, beans, fruit, and many more, it ought to raise blood sugar. So why does it do exactly the opposite? How does a plant-based diet improve blood sugar control so dramatically? So to understand this, he says, let's go to Connecticut, where the Yale University researchers are looking inside the human body. Using a high-tech scanning method called magnetic resonance spectroscopy, the Yale researchers examined research volunteers, finding microscopic fat particles inside their muscle cells. These fat particles are called intramyocellular lipid. Intra is for inside, myo, M-Y-O, is for muscle, and lipid is for fat. Similar particles are also found in liver cells. It turns out that as these fat particles build up within your cells, they interfere with insulin ability to work, as we discussed briefly in chapter 5. Reversing polycystic ovary syndrome. That's where we saw the same thing. In other words, fat inside cells causes insulin resistance. And Dr. Neal Barnard in this book points to the fact that it's the fat inside your cells is different from the fat around your stomach in a way. So that is why you see people that are thin that look like they don't have a lot of body fat, and they have type 2 diabetes, because the fat is inside the cells. And when this fat is inside the cells, it's making the cell unresponsive when insulin tries to open it to get the glucose in. So he says, as an analogy, imagine what would happen if some prankster were to jam chewing gum into your front door lock while you were away. When you arrive home and try to insert your key, you discover you cannot open the door. There is, of course, nothing wrong with your key, and your lock is not really broken. It is just that your lock is filled with gum. In this case, we're talking about fat. You need to clean it out. You need to clean the lock. How do you clean your cells from all of this fat that has built up inside? Well, by stop eating processed foods and animal foods that are full of saturated fat. It's that easy. Change into a whole food, plant-based diet that is maybe 10, 15% of your total calories per day, only 10, 15% fat instead of 40 or 50% fat. In diabetes, the muscle and liver cells are filled not with gum, but with fat. When that happens, the insulin key no longer works very well. And the solution is to clean that fat away. Where do these particles come from? Well, how about a breakfast of bacon and eggs? Or a lunch where you have a bologna and cheese sandwich? Or greasy potato chips, salad oils, or a cheese pizza for dinner? These fats end up in your cells. I find it kind of amusing to think that, to see how people think that all of this huge amounts of saturated fat that they eat daily, somehow it just goes poof in the air and it disappears, when in fact, it doesn't disappear. It has to go somewhere. And they go and they end up in your cells. In contrast, a vegan diet has no animal fat. If oils are minimized too, or taken out completely, the fat inside the muscle and liver cells starts to dissipate. Through a series of scientific studies, we have tested a plant-based diet for people with type 2 diabetes in many different settings, and also in people with long-standing diabetes who were experiencing the pain of diabetic neuropathy. You all know that neuropathy can be unforgiving, causing continuing pain, especially in the feet, and greatly impairing the quality of life. So this is on page 125. Okay, so he says, let me give you specifics of how to implement a healthful eating plan. There are 3 steps. Number 1, avoid animal products. Number 2, keep oils to a minimum. Okay. A few plant-based foods like nuts, peanut butter, and avocados are naturally high in fat. I would suggest avoiding these foods for now. Okay, if you're trying to reverse diabetes or heart disease, like Dr. Esselstyn does, for at least until you get things under control, you need to avoid nuts and seeds and avocados and nut butters. Yes, the quality of these fats is much better than the animal fats, but our goal for now is to get extra weight off and to remove the fat from your muscle and liver cells. If you were to add up your fat in the course of a day, it should add up to about 20 to 30 grams. That is much lower than is typical in North America, and it will help you reach your goals. So if you had some kind of a food calculator and that could tell you how much fat you're eating a day, it should be between 20 and 30 grams a day. If it goes beyond that, that fat is going to end up in your cells. And that's the beginning of insulin resistance. And if it continues, it will develop with type 2 diabetes. Okay, so the 3 steps: avoid animal products, avoid oils of any kind, and favor, it doesn't say exclusively, but favor low glycemic index foods. And I mentioned this is in another session. Glycemic index has to be taken carefully and understood because it can create problems because it is confusing. It is confusing because sometimes a slice of cheesy pizza will have a lower glycemic index than a banana or a sweet potato. And of course, you would not want to have the greasy food, but if you just go with the glycemic index. So let's keep in mind that while we're talking about all of this, we're always talking within the plant food way of eating. So instead of table sugar, for example, that has a high glycemic index because there is no water and no fiber to create a shield so that you don't have a spike in your blood sugar. So instead of table sugar, have fruit. The fruit has natural sugars but it's perfectly combined and diluted with water and fiber and many other nutrients. So it's perfectly fine to have whole fruit. Fruits have a sweet taste, but most have a surprisingly low glycemic index and are easier on your blood sugar. Also, instead of wheat breads, favor rye and pumpernickel. Something about the rye grain causes it to have less effect on blood sugar. So if you still want to have your bread, try switching to pumpernickel bread, rye bread, or some of the breads like Ezekiel bread. Another thing you can do to keep the low glycemic index, in the range, instead of typical whole cereals, which are loaded with sugar, of course, have bran cereal, or better yet, this is my own recommendation, have old-fashioned oatmeal, or better yet, have steel cut oatmeal because it's more whole, or even the best of all the options, have oat groats, which is the actual grain that has not been touched, split or cut or anything, full of fiber, and then it will absorb the water when you cook it. Instead of typical white potatoes, favor sweet potatoes. So yeah, favor, it says. It does not mean to never touch a white potato. Once your levels are leveling, it is perfectly fine. Dr. McDougall in his program has no, does not put any limits on any of the potatoes, whether they're white potatoes or sweet potatoes. But if this is something that that worries you, go for the sweet potatoes. And finally, beans and pasta, even white pasta. Okay, so beans and pasta are surprisingly gentle on your blood sugar. Who would say? A menu built from our healthy 4 food groups, vegetables, fruits, whole grains, and legumes, is naturally low on glycemic index. So you don't have to obsess about it and worry. It's going to be just fine if you go 100%. So then he says, let me share a few additional tips. This is at the bottom of page 127. First, let me encourage you to bring raw foods, for example, fresh fruits and salads, into your routine. They tend to accelerate weight loss. Of course they do, because they have more water and intact fiber. And of course, water and fiber creates bulk, and you will feel fuller that way. Number two, second, be sure that you're not excluding healthy carbohydrate foods like sweet potatoes, beans, and fruit. It is true that limiting carbohydrate can reduce your blood sugar to a degree because, as you know, carbohydrate releases glucose as it digests. However, the cause of insulin resistance is fat buildup. Remember that that is the main cause, and tackling this as far more and tackling that is far more powerful for blood sugar control. If you are avoiding carbohydrate-rich foods, you may be increasing meat, dairy products, eggs, or oils, all of which can contribute to weight gain and insulin resistance. This is a common mistake that people make. They go on a diet that is low in complex carbohydrates, and they increase meat, dairy products, eggs, oils, and of course, at the beginning, they may see that the blood sugar lowers, but as these things will make you gain weight, then you start having problems again with the blood sugar. And then finally, he says, third, have fun, enjoy new food products and new restaurant choices. And so he said, just look in the back of this book for recipes and start looking and trying new things. Personally, I think that if you're going to follow 100% a whole food plant-based diet like the one that is described in this book, eating at restaurants can be catastrophic because most restaurants will not know how to make you a meal with no oil or without tons of oil, salt, and sugar. And it's just difficult. So I would suggest that if you're trying to reverse diabetes and you're going into a whole food plant-based diet to do it, that you give yourself a couple of weeks at least to feel the full power of this way of eating by avoiding going to restaurants. Foods and type 1 diabetes. Okay, so on page 128, it says the diet change described earlier, avoiding animal products, minimizing oils, and favoring low glycemic in the foods, are also helpful for people with type 1 diabetes. They will not eliminate the need for insulin, but they will help in two important ways. Number one, it will reduce the requirements of insulin. So that's a good thing. And number two, a healthy diet protects your blood vessels. Keep in mind that the principal danger of diabetes is damage to the tiny blood vessels to the eyes, the heart, the kidneys, and the extremities. So you want to baby your blood vessels. To do that, it makes sense to eliminate animal fat and cholesterol completely. On page 129, he talks about antibodies and how antibodies are supposed to target viruses and bacteria. As part of your immune system defense system, that is their job. But antibodies can also arise in response to foods, believe it or not. Once they are launched, antibodies can do unintended damage. They can attack your joints, for example, causing rheumatoid arthritis, and they can also attack your thyroid and other parts of your body. Okay. Page 129 also, avoiding hypoglycemia. Basically, this is when your blood sugar levels go way down, and this can be dangerous and in some cases cause death. So you need to be careful. And so what Dr. Barnard says is what most doctors will say, and what I tell my participants of the 7-day program. When you change to a whole food plant-based diet, you need to be in touch with your doctor and healthcare provider. Let him or her know that you're switching your diet. because very soon, perhaps even on day one, your blood sugar will start to drop if you're changing your way of eating and you're still taking medication. So you need to be in touch so that medications can be adjusted by your own doctor. So this is crucial. That's what it says here on page 130. Also, you need to know what the symptoms of hypoglycemia are. Well, when your blood sugar starts to drop too low, you start shaking, sweating, you have this feeling of anxiety, you're hungry, you may feel weak, you may also feel rapid heartbeats, lightheadedness or dizziness, sleepiness or confusion, and difficulty speaking. So keep in mind those symptoms. Also, if you have type 2 diabetes, you may want to carry a glucose meter. If you experience the symptoms noted above, check your blood sugar. If it is less than 70 milligrams per deciliter, or whatever other value your healthcare provider has recommended, have something to raise your blood sugar quickly. And if you're driving, pull over and check your blood sugar. If you cannot test yourself for whatever reason, assume you're low and have something to eat. Then check your blood glucose again after 15 minutes. What can you do to bring up your blood sugar levels higher quickly? Well, you can always carry with you glucose tablets, which you can buy at a drugstore. You can also have half a cup of fruit juice. Any fruit juice will do, because remember, the juices have no fiber. So the sugar will enter your bloodstream immediately. And that is why we advise in general against juices, because you need the fiber to create that shield and not have an immediate increase in blood sugar. Also, what can raise it fast is half a cup of a soft drink. Do not choose a diet drink. Personally, I wouldn't choose that unless I was in a total emergency and all I had available was Coke or some other soft drink. And then, well, of course, you do what you need to do. Also, you can have 5 or 6 pieces of hard candy, or just basically 1 or 2 teaspoons, not tablespoons, 1 or 2 teaspoons of just plain table sugar. He also, to protect yourself against hypoglycemia, he says on page 131, wear a medical identification bracelet. This can be very helpful. Check your blood glucose during exercise, because exercise will lower blood sugar. Number 6, be attentive to the possibility of nighttime hypoglycemia. Yes, it can also occur while you're sleeping. Here are some common signs: heavy perspiration, nightmares or crying out, and unusual tiredness, confusion, or irritability on awakening. If you suspect nighttime hypoglycemia, set your alarm for about 2 or 3 in the morning and check your blood sugar a few nights in a row, and share your results with your healthcare provider, who can adjust your medications as needed. Okay, so these are things you can do to protect yourself against hypoglycemia while you're changing the way you eat. Another thing that can help with reversing diabetes is doing some kind of a moderate intensity activity, and it needs to be done for 2.5 hours to 5 hours per week, okay, not per day. So you're talking about anywhere between half an hour a day for 6 days a week. That would be 3 hours, to maybe an hour a day, 5 times a week for about 5 hours. Okay, this will help. But Just know that if you cannot, for whatever reason, do any exercise, the research studies that have shown the power of a plant-based diet were done without exercise. Okay, so on page 132, there's something very important, and it says, keep an eye on your blood sugar. Some people find that during the first few days of starting a vegan diet, their blood sugar values rise a bit. This is normal. There's nothing to worry about. This is likely because you are still insulin resistant. It doesn't disappear right away. So starchy foods will cause your blood sugar to bump upward temporarily. Stick with the healthful guidelines above, and this will typically turn around in a few days. The times that I have attended Dr. McDougall's program, or when I go to True North Health Center, this is what I've seen over and over again. I've never seen anything different than this, and that is the first day or two or three, your blood sugar may go a little higher. You want your doctor to still control and to still know. But if you're strict 100%, it does, and you become less and less insulin resistant because your cells are getting rid of that intramyocellular, lipid or that fat inside the cells, then you're fine, then no problem, okay? If you have any kind of infection, such as a viral illness, remember that can raise your blood sugar. So that's important to remember. Also, steroids medications will raise your blood sugar, so be aware of that. Be sure your meals are completely free of animal products and added oils. Go on a search and destroy mission for fatty foods, such as nut butters and guacamole. If you see that your blood sugar is not going down, really look with a magnifying glass at everything that you're eating. You cannot mix things in this case. Okay, so you have to completely take out the animal products and dairy and added oils. And anything that is high in fat, because you're trying to get the fat out of your cells so that the insulin can work. And so don't have any fatty foods, even if it is healthy fat, like nuts and seeds and nut butters and guacamole. Avoid the temptation to limit your intake of healthful carbohydrates. This is another important thing. People have been scared so much about carbohydrates that they want to limit it, but you have to avoid that temptation. Some people hope that by avoiding beans and sweet potatoes and rice and other starchy foods, their blood sugars will drop more quickly. Typically, the opposite occurs. So don't try to do that. People who try to avoid these foods have the most trouble over the long run. Keep healthful plant-based foods in your routine and let them do their work. All right, so that is chapter 8 on diabetes. Tomorrow we will talk about thyroid, which is another common issue, and also healthy skin and hair, because people sometimes mention when they go on a whole food plant-based diet that their skin becomes dry and their hair, they lose more hair. So we'll be talking about that tomorrow, which is the last day, unfortunately, of our book club. But remember that you can always go to my YouTube channel. You can go to the playlist where it says book clubs, and you can look not only at this book club, but you can look at this book club. You can look at the Start Solution book club. I have done so many, and they are good. Some of them have doctors as a guest. Some of them have cooking demos. So they're all available for you. They're free. Very good. Well, thank you for being here today, and I'll see you tomorrow. Tomorrow, Friday, for our last session, the time will change because at this time tomorrow, I will be doing a cooking demo during Chef AJ's live show. Therefore, our session will be at 6 p.m. Eastern time. If you live in Central Time, that's 5 p.m. And if you live in the Pacific Coast, that is 3 p.m. Okay. Tomorrow, I'm moving it later due to my prior commitment with Chef AJ. And to watch that, all you have to do is go to Chef AJ's YouTube channel and just wait until the broadcast starts. It starts at 11, I think. Let's see. It's 2 p.m. It's 2 p.m. Eastern. So it's 11 a.m. Pacific. Okay. And thank you once more. I'll see you all tomorrow. Bye-bye.